They said the dead couldn't speak. But as Elena stood alone in the ruins of Seaglass Cottage, listening to the whispers stitched into the salt-heavy wind, she knew better. Some ghosts didn't haunt graveyards, they haunted choices. And tonight, as the blood-red tide clawed at the shore, Elena was ready to answer them. With fire. With fury. With the truth no one in Marrow Bay dared to name. Part 1, The Caregiver's Vigil. The ocean was restless that evening, throwing itself against the cliffs below the Whitmore house with a desperation that mirrored Elena's heart. Salt wind rattled the ancient windows of the cottage, and somewhere in the walls, a mouse scurried, seeking shelter from the rising storm. Elena tightened the worn shawl around her shoulders and stood at the end of Margaret Whitmore's bed, watching the rise and fall of the old woman's chest, each breath shallower than the last. In the fading light, Maggie looked small, impossibly small for a woman who had once ruled Willow Bay with a laugh so loud it could scatter seagulls. Her hands, once calloused and quick, lay curled and still atop the faded quilt Elena had brought from home. The scent of the room was heavy with lavender oil and something sharper underneath, the metallic tang of the end nearing. Elena moved quietly to the bedside, lowering herself into the battered chair that had molded itself to her shape over countless nights. She brushed a loose curl of gray hair from Maggie's forehead, murmuring, "I'm here, Maggie. I'm right here," her voice cracked around the words like brittle porcelain. A single moth battered itself senseless against the lamp in the corner. The cottage, perched precariously over the cliffs, seemed to lean with the wind, groaning in protest. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, letting the roaring sea and the beating heart of the storm fill the hollow ache in her chest. She was so tired, not just bone deep, but soul deep, from the endless days of care, the whispered insults from the Whitmores, the constant gnawing fear that she wasn't enough, wouldn't ever be enough. From the next room, a soft creak of floorboards made her stiffen. Owen, her son, peered around the doorframe with wide, solemn eyes. He said nothing, he didn't have to. At 10 years old, he understood things no child should. Elena motioned for him to come, and he padded over in socked feet, leaning his small body against her arm. "She's going soon, isn't she?" he whispered. Elena nodded, throat too tight for words. Together, they sat vigil, two small figures against the vast weight of an ending life. It had not always been like this. Once, Maggie had towered over Elena, her approval rare and coveted like sun in a long winter. Elena had married into the Whitmore family young, full of hope and dreams stitched together from naive cloth. Nathan had been dazzling back then, a devil-may-care grin, promises spun from gold thread. Promises unravel, though. And when Nathan had disappeared, following one too many reckless schemes, it was Elena who remained, swept into the undertow of obligations the Whitmores had no intention of sharing. "She's your responsibility now," Julia had said coldly after Maggie's stroke, flinging a set of house keys at Elena's chest. "Family looks after family. Family." The word tasted like rust on her tongue now. Maggie's breathing hitched, a wet, gurgling sound that sliced through Elena's memories like a knife. Instinct moved her before thought. She lifted Maggie's head slightly, adjusted the oxygen tube, whispered words of comfort she wasn't sure the old woman could even hear. Owen clung tighter to her side. "Does it hurt?" he asked, voice trembling. "I don't think so," Elena answered, though she couldn't be sure. She prayed, if there was mercy in the universe, that Maggie was already somewhere else in her mind, somewhere beyond the cliffs and storms and heavy regrets. Outside, a sheet of rain lashed the windows, streaking them into blurred watercolor paintings of the world beyond. Elena caught a glimpse of Julia's sleek black sedan pulling into the driveway, headlights slicing through the mist. Figures spilled out, Victor, Tessa, laughing carelessly as they dashed for the porch. Laughter. How dare they laugh? Elena felt a hot, bright rage bloom in her chest, but she tamped it down, focusing instead on Maggie's frail form. "Hold on a little longer, Maggie," she whispered fiercely. "Don't let them see you go." The front door slammed open, and with it came the Whitmores, perfume, wet leather, the metallic click of heels. Julia swept into the room without knocking, her gaze flicking dismissively over Elena and Owen before settling on Maggie with a theatrical gasp. "Oh, Poor dear mother, Julia intoned, voice dripping with counterfeit sorrow. Is she almost gone? Elena didn't dignify it with a response. She rose slowly, shielding Owen with her body as Victor and Tessa crowded into the small bedroom, bringing the reek of rain and cologne and greed with them. You've done well, Elena, Victor said, offering a smirk that didn't reach his dead fish eyes. Such a loyal little caretaker. Bet you're tired of playing nursemaid, huh? Tessa's false nails clicked against her wine glass. Yes, she had the audacity to bring wine into this sacred room, as she chuckled. Wonder what dear Maggie left for her favorite daughter-in-law, she mused loudly. Elena said nothing. She had learned, painfully and thoroughly, that words were wasted on the Whitmores. As the night deepened, the Whitmores grew louder, filling the house with arguments about inheritances, property, who deserved what. Maggie, mercifully, slept through it all, or seemed to. Elena stayed by her side, feeling more like a guardian than a family member, a sentinel at the gates. At midnight, Maggie's hand twitched. Elena caught it in her own, cold and light as a feather. The old woman's eyes fluttered open, clouded but aware. Elena, Maggie rasped, the first time she had spoken in days. I'm here, Elena said, tears already springing to her eyes. A terrible, fragile smile ghosted across Maggie's face. Her fingers weakly curled around Elena's. And in that moment, past the years of coldness, the harsh words, the withheld affections, there was forgiveness. Real, aching, heavy forgiveness. Maggie tried to speak again, but the words broke apart in a cough. Elena leaned closer, desperate to hear. Thank you, Maggie mouthed. And then, a final breath, shallow and shuddering, like a candle guttering out. Maggie Whitmore was gone. The storm broke apart at that precise instant, as if the heavens themselves had been waiting. The wind slackened, the rain softened into a misty drizzle. The old house seemed to settle too, sighing from its bones. Elena pressed Maggie's hand to her cheek, silent tears slipping down her face. Owen, sensing the gravity of the moment, wrapped his arms around her waist and buried his face in her side. Julia, ever the opportunist, darted forward the moment Elena let go. She pressed 2 fingers to Maggie's throat, confirming what they all already knew, before turning to Victor with an electric gleam in her eyes. It's done, she breathed. Tessa raised her glass in a macabre toast. To new beginnings, she said. Elena wanted to scream, wanted to tear the room apart with her grief, but she stayed still, frozen, feeling the weight of generations pressing down on her. She thought of the years she had given. The birthdays missed, the dreams deferred, the life suspended. All of it for this woman, who had, at the very end, given her something that no one else in that vulture's nest ever could, genuine gratitude. And somehow, that would have to be enough. Outside, the first tentative rays of dawn pushed through the lingering mist, turning the sea into a silvered sheet. Elena rose to her feet, steadying Owen with a hand on his small shoulder. We're going home, she said. Owen looked up at her with wide, trusting eyes. Home? Elena nodded. Home would be the little cottage at the end of Wren Lane. Home would be wherever they were safe from the Whitmores. Home would be where no one else could steal another piece of her heart. As she stepped out into the pale new day, Elena made a silent vow, whatever storms came next, she would not be broken. Not again. Part 2, Inheritance and Betrayal. The morning after Maggie Whitmore's death unfolded like a slow-moving fever dream. Gray light crawled across the floorboards of the Whitmore house, exposing every crack, every flaw, the peeling wallpaper, the damp that crept in from the sea, the wine stains hastily scrubbed but never truly erased. The house, like the family that inhabited it, was a relic wearing a mask of grandeur. Elena sat at the worn kitchen table, Owen at her side doodling absently on the back of an old grocery list. She clutched a mug of black coffee that had long since gone cold, staring into it as if answers might rise from the bitter depths. Her muscles ached from exhaustion, but her mind was alert, painfully, cruelly awake. In the next room, voices swelled and receded like the tide. The Whitmores were already picking apart Maggie's legacy with a predatory glee. Elena caught snatches of their conversation through the thin walls, words like will and assets and undisclosed holdings slicing through the heavy air. A nauseating familiarity settled in her stomach. They were carving up Maggie's memory before her body was even cold. Elena, Julia's sharp voice pierced the kitchen like a dagger. You're needed in the study. The summons carried the weight of inevitability. Elena set down her mug with a trembling hand, kissed the top of Owen's head, and rose. Each step toward the study felt heavier than the last, as though invisible chains clung to her ankles. The study was a time capsule. Heavy velvet drapes trapped the dust and gloom inside. Shelves of untouched books lined the walls, grand titles no Whitmore had read, and above the cold, dark fireplace, a portrait of Maggie glared down at them all, unsmiling. Victor lounged in an armchair, swirling a glass of brandy as though celebrating. Tessa perched on the arm of the sofa, swinging one high-heeled foot like a metronome of impatience. And Julia stood, papers in hand, a vulture poised to feast. At the center of it all sat a man Elena didn't recognize, gray suit, thin smile, briefcase at his feet. The lawyer. Elena Langston, he greeted, voice smooth as polished stone. My name is Conrad Vance. I'm here to execute Margaret Whitmore's final testament. The words tasted foul in Elena's ears. Final testament. Final betrayal. Conrad cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses with the meticulousness of a man who thrived on fine print. Mrs. Whitmore's instructions were explicit. I'll begin. He read from the document, and the words fell like blows. To Julia Whitmore, the primary residence and its remaining contents. To Victor Whitmore, ownership of the Whitmore vineyards. To Tessa Whitmore, full rights to the Whitmore jewelry collection and an undisclosed financial trust. Each name was a stone thrown at Elena's chest. Each gift a reinforcement that she was, and always would be, an outsider. And finally, Conrad said, pausing, to Elena Langston. The room tilted. Elena gripped the back of a chair, bracing herself. A small property known as Seaglass Cottage, located at the far end of Willow Bay. Silence. Thick, choking silence. Julia laughed first, a high, cruel sound that grated against Elena's skin. The shack, she gasped between peals. She left her the shack. Victor chuckled low in his throat, clearly entertained. Even Tessa managed a twisted grin, raising her glass in mocking salute. Elena said nothing. Inside, her heart was breaking open, not because she had expected riches, but because even in death, Maggie had branded her second class. An afterthought. Yet amid the hurt, a strange flicker of defiance sparked. Seaglass Cottage. It wasn't much, a weather-beaten place clinging to the edge of the world, but it would be hers. Not something borrowed, not something indebted. Hers. She forced herself to stand tall as Conrad handed her a slim envelope. The deed and keys, he said quietly. There is one additional note for you. Handwritten. Elena's fingers trembled as she broke the seal. Forgive me. I should have loved you better. Make something beautiful where I could not. Maggie's handwriting was spidery, almost illegible, but the weight of the words landed squarely in Elena's chest. Later that afternoon, Elena packed what little she owned into the battered station wagon she'd driven since college. Owen sat in the passenger seat, clutching a tattered stuffed bear and watching the Whitmore mansion disappear in the rearview mirror with wide, wondering eyes. Are we poor now? He asked suddenly. Elena swallowed hard. We're free now, she said instead. The road to Seaglass Cottage twisted and wound like an old scar across the cliffside. Fog clung to the ground in ghostly wisps, and the sea hissed against the rocks below. Elena drove with white-knuckled focus, each turn a test of will. When at last they crested the final hill, the cottage came into view, and her breath caught in her throat. It was worse than she remembered. Paint peeled from the clapboards like shedding skin. The roof sagged in the middle, weeping moss. The fence leaned drunkenly to one side, half swallowed by wild roses and choking ivy. A single seagull wheeled overhead, its cry ragged and mournful. Owen frowned. It looks haunted. Elena almost laughed. Maybe it is, she said. But it's ours. The first night at Seaglass Cottage was brutal. The fireplace spat more smoke into the room than heat, and the damp seemed to seep into Elena's very bones. Every window rattled. Every floorboard groaned. Owen slept curled against her side on the sagging couch, while Elena lay awake, staring at the ceiling, counting heartbeats and regrets. But as the first pale light of dawn crept through the cracks, something shifted. Elena rose, barefoot, and stepped outside. The sea stretched before her, vast, wild, unconquerable. The sky blazed gold and rose at the horizon, a living fire that painted the world anew. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Elena breathed. Deep, full, unafraid. They set to work the next day. Elena ripped down moldy curtains with a ferocity that startled even her. Owen, laughing, swept out a decade of dust and dead spiders with a broken broom. They scrubbed and hammered and patched. They swore and they sang. They bled on rusted nails and bruised their knees on warped floorboards. The cottage fought them, but it yielded, inch by inch. And slowly, impossibly, it began to shine. Yet peace, Elena learned, was never meant to last. It began with a letter, hand-delivered one misty afternoon. A cream envelope, embossed with gold. The Whitmore family crest glared from the wax seal like an accusation. Inside, an invitation. Julia Whitmore cordially requested Elena's presence at a family gathering, the reading of an amendment to Maggie's will. Elena's hands went cold. An amendment? Maggie had been bedridden, barely able to speak. How could there be more? Fear prickled along her spine. Fear, and a flicker of grim curiosity. Whatever the Whitmores were plotting, it would not end with a handshake and smiles. She tucked the invitation into her pocket and turned her face back toward the sea. Storms, she thought grimly, were inevitable. But some storms, she was ready to meet head-on. Part 3, The Hidden Clause. The Whitmore estate loomed ahead, a gray monolith against the gathering dusk. Elena's hands tightened around the steering wheel, the leather groaning under her grip. Owen, left under the watchful eye of their elderly neighbor, was mercifully spared the evening's inevitable carnage. The car rolled to a reluctant stop at the foot of the marble steps. Light bled from the windows in sharp golden slashes, setting the mist aglow. Elena stepped out into the thickening fog, her heart a drumbeat against her ribs. Each footstep up the stairs felt like a betrayal. Each breath tasted like regret. She pushed open the great oak door, its ancient hinges wailing a sorrowful welcome. The gathering was smaller than she expected, tighter, more venomous. Julia sat at the head of the long dining table, a crown of cold authority resting invisible but heavy on her brow. Victor and Tessa flanked her, both dressed in the calculated casualness of the wealthy. A few other relatives lurked at the edges, cousins Elena barely remembered, their faces taut with barely concealed hunger. And at the far end, presiding over them all like a judge at a hanging, was Conrad Vance. He rose smoothly at her entrance. Ms. Langston. We're honored. The falsehood hung in the air like smoke. Without a word, Elena slid into an empty seat. Every eye followed her, dissecting, weighing, scheming. It was a feeding ground, and she was the wounded fawn. Conrad unfolded a new sheaf of papers with the reverence of a priest handling sacred text. Before her passing, Mrs. Whitmore requested a confidential addendum to her will, he intoned. To be disclosed only if certain conditions were met. Elena's skin prickled. Julia's lips curved into a smile so tight it could slice glass. Conrad continued, it pertains to the ownership of Seaglass Cottage, and the Whitmore Legacy Foundation. A low murmur rippled through the room. The foundation was the family's untouchable treasure, a vast charity organization that cloaked generations of sins in the robes of public service. Elena stiffened. What did she have to do with that? Conrad adjusted his glasses. It appears Mrs. Whitmore appointed Ms. Langston as a provisional steward. The room erupted. Victor slammed his fist on the table, rattling the silverware. Tessa gasped aloud, one manicured hand flying to her throat. Julia rose, spine rigid, her voice a whip crack. This is outrageous. That girl, she's not blood. Conrad remained impassive. Mrs. Whitmore's instructions were clear. The stewardship is temporary, pending specific requirements. And what requirements are those? Julia hissed. Conrad hesitated, the first crack in his professional armor. They were unusual. He turned to Elena, his voice dropping. You must reside at Seaglass Cottage for a full calendar year. You must make it profitable, self-sustaining. You must hold the property against any challenge. The room spun. Elena gripped the table's edge until her knuckles whitened. If you succeed, Conrad said softly, you inherit full control of the foundation and Seaglass permanently. And if I fail? Elena's voice was a whisper, a thread in the storm. Julia answered, venomous and triumphant. Then it all reverts to us. As it should. The drive back to Seaglass was a blur. Elena's mind boiled with half-formed plans and sharper fears. How could she possibly transform a crumbling cottage into a thriving venture? She had no capital, no connections. Only grit and a stubborn, battered hope. Yet beneath the fear, something else stirred, a fierce, primal pride. Maggie had not abandoned her after all. She had thrown her a gauntlet. Elena clenched her jaw. Challenge accepted. The following weeks were a crucible. Elena pored over business permits by lamplight while Owen snored softly in the next room. She scoured thrift shops for salvaged furniture, negotiated with local carpenters, bartered her photography skills for materials. Every inch of Seaglass Cottage bore the mark of her hands, her sweat, her dreams stitched into its bones. Bit by bit, the cottage transformed. The vision was simple but daring, a seaside bed and breakfast, rustic yet welcoming, where travelers could escape the mechanical grind of their lives. By early summer, the first guests trickled in, curious artists, weary writers, lost souls in search of the horizon. They marveled at the cottage's battered charm, the way the salt air wrapped around you like an old song. Word spread. But shadows moved too. Late one night, Elena found the garden gate swinging open, hacked to splinters. Another morning, the sign for Seaglass was spray-painted over, traitor. Phone calls came at odd hours, silence, breathing, then a click. Elena knew who it was. She pictured Julia's painted nails tapping the receiver, Victor's smile tight with suppressed glee. They were trying to break her. And some nights, lying awake as the waves whispered through the cracked window panes, she almost let them. One evening, while repairing a cracked window frame, Elena noticed something odd. A loose plank in the floor, warped not from age but from disturbance. Curious, she pried it up. Beneath, she found a small iron box, corroded by time, but still intact. Her pulse raced. Inside, carefully wrapped in faded velvet, were letters. Letters from Maggie. To her. The words were raw. Ragged. Terrifying in their truth. Elena. If you're reading this, it means you stayed. It means you chose to fight. I was a coward. I let fear shape me. I let blood bind me when love should have. The Whitmores, they are not just cruel. They are dangerous. There are secrets buried deeper than inheritance here. Secrets they would kill to protect. Seaglass is more than a house. It's a shield. A key. And you are its rightful guardian. The air seemed to thicken, heavy with revelation. Elena sat back, heart pounding so hard she thought she might shatter from the inside out. A shield. A key. Secrets they would kill to protect. Maggie hadn't just left her a home. She had left her a weapon. But against what? The next morning, Elena drove to the county archives, a place so dusty and forgotten it felt like time itself had given up on it. Hours passed in a haze of brittle paper and yellowed maps. And slowly, piece by terrible piece, the truth surfaced. The Whitmore Foundation had not been born from benevolence. It had been built on land stolen generations ago, from indigenous families driven out by fire and blood. Profits laundered through charity, influence bought with silent bribes. And Seaglass Cottage. It stood on the last uncorrupted piece of that stolen land. Without it, the foundation's legal standing crumbled. Without it, the Whitmores would lose everything. That was why they wanted it back. That was why they would do anything to see her fail. Elena sat alone in the crumbling archive as the afternoon light died around her. Terror pressed against her ribcage. But beneath it, something even stronger bloomed, an iron resolve she hadn't known she possessed. This wasn't just a fight for a house. It was a battle for justice. For every story Maggie had been too broken to tell. For every life crushed under the Whitmore heel. Elena rose, the final letter clutched in her hand. "Let them come," she whispered into the gathering dark. "This time, I'm ready." Part 4, The Siege of Seaglass. The ocean screamed that night. Winds battered Seaglass Cottage with such ferocity that it shuddered on its ancient foundations. Rain clawed at the windows in wild, unrelenting sheets. It was the kind of night that made even the bravest men bolt their doors and whisper old prayers. Elena sat in the parlor, wrapped in an old woolen shawl, the iron box of letters at her feet like a silent, knowing dog. The fireplace sputtered against the drafts, casting wild, jumpy shadows across the floor. In her lap, Owen dozed fitfully, his small hand clutching a wooden toy boat he refused to part with even in sleep. His hair clung damply to his forehead, and every so often, his mouth twitched with restless dreams. Elena smoothed his hair back, her heart twisting into a shape she could barely recognize. "No matter what," she thought, "I will not let them take this from us." At exactly midnight, the first stone hit the window. It shattered the quiet with a violence that made Elena jump to her feet, pulling Owen into her arms. Outside, half seen through the broken glass and the storm's fury, figures moved, dark, shapeless against the wildness of the night. Shadows with purpose. A second stone followed the first, embedding itself in the opposite wall with a hollow thunk. Elena flinched, instinct dragging her backward. Pinned to it was a note. "Tick-tock, little girl." Her stomach dropped. Her hands went numb. This wasn't fear anymore. This was war. She moved fast, heart pounding. First, Owen, bundled into a nest of blankets behind the old steel bathtub upstairs. It was the strongest place in the house. She kissed his forehead, murmuring promises she dared not believe. Then she armed herself, an old fire poker, heavy and brutal in her grip, and the thick flashlight from the cellar. Her hands shook, but her jaw was set. She turned off every light except one, a flickering porch lamp. A baited trap. The storm howled louder, furious as a living thing. Minutes stretched, taut and shivering. And then she heard it, the creak of the back gate. The crunch of boots over gravel. Elena edged closer to the window, careful not to expose herself. Through the warped glass, she caught a glimpse, Victor, broad and brutish, his face twisted into a sneer even the rain couldn't wash away. Behind him, two more, men Elena didn't recognize, but their intentions needed no translation. Tessa's voice drifted faintly from the gloom, high, brittle, frantic. "She's just a girl. Break in. Take it back." Panic clawed at Elena's chest, a sharp, savage thing. But she gritted her teeth and swallowed it down. "You have one chance," she thought. One. As Victor kicked in the back door with a roar, Elena was already moving. She slipped down the hall, silent as breath. The poker weighed down her hand like judgment. The door exploded inward with a sickening crack. Victor stormed in, soaked and swearing. "You little bitch. Come out," he bellowed, the words bouncing off the cracked walls. Elena crouched behind the old sideboard, heart hammering so loud she was sure they could hear it. The second man entered, flashlight sweeping. Elena counted their steps, 1, 2, 3, and then she struck. The poker crashed into the man's shin. He screamed, dropping his flashlight. It rolled crazily, slicing through the darkness. Victor lunged, but Elena was faster. Adrenaline turned her into something feral, something fierce. She slipped past him, out into the foyer, slamming the door behind her. But Tessa was there. Smiling. Holding a gun. "Where do you think you're going, sweetheart?" she crooned, the pistol steady despite the tremble of her lipstick mouth. Elena froze. The world seemed to narrow to a single point, the cold, oily gleam of the barrel. Tessa's finger tightened on the trigger. And then, a shriek from upstairs. Owen. Elena's body moved without her consent, a primal scream tearing free as she charged forward. The gun fired, deafening, blinding, but Tessa's aim faltered in shock. The shot went wide, punching a hole in the wall. Elena tackled her to the ground, hands scrabbling, teeth bared. Tessa shrieked, clawing, biting. But Elena didn't stop. She couldn't afford to. With a savage grunt, she slammed Tessa's head against the tile floor. Once. Twice. The gun clattered away. Tessa lay still. Breathing, but unconscious. Elena staggered to her feet, lungs burning. From upstairs, Owen screamed again, high, terrified, pleading. She sprinted up the stairs 2 at a time. In the nursery, Victor loomed over Owen's tiny huddled form, his hand twisted cruelly in the boy's collar. "Let him go," Elena roared. Victor turned, grinning. "Make me," he said. Something inside Elena snapped. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She attacked. The fire poker crashed into Victor's ribs with a wet, crunching sound. He howled, dropping Owen. The boy scrambled away, sobbing. Victor lashed out wildly, but Elena ducked, driving the poker up into his gut. He staggered back, gurgling curses. "Get out," Elena hissed, voice shaking with rage. "Get out of my house." Victor, bleeding and broken, spat at her feet, then stumbled down the stairs and into the storm, dragging his injured accomplice with him. The front door banged shut behind them, carried on a gust of wind so strong it nearly tore it from its hinges. And then there was silence. Elena dropped the poker. Her knees buckled. Owen ran into her arms, sobbing, his small body racked with shivers. She held him tight, rocking him, murmuring nonsense, anything, everything. Tears spilled hot and unchecked down her face. But she didn't care. They were alive. They were still standing. Seaglass Cottage, battered, broken, still stood, too. Together, they had survived the siege. Hours later, after she had locked every window and door, after she had patched Tessa's bleeding head and called the police, Elena sat alone on the porch steps, wrapped in an old quilt. The storm was passing. Above her, the sky began to peel apart into thin, tattered clouds. The first trembling stars blinked through. Behind her, Owen slept peacefully at last. And Elena, bruised, bloodied, exhausted, smiled a small, fierce smile. "You tried to break me," she thought, staring into the vast, trembling night. "But you only made me stronger." Tomorrow would bring new battles. The Whitmores wouldn't stop. They couldn't afford to. But neither would she. Not now. Not ever. Part 5, The Blood Price. Morning unfurled slowly over Seaglass Cove, like a wound reluctant to scab. The air hung heavy, damp with the ghost of last night's storm. Above the wrecked coastline, gulls cried mournful songs into a bruised sky. Their wings sliced through the mist like knives. Inside Seaglass Cottage, silence lay like a shroud. Elena stood at the kitchen sink, hands submerged in cold, soapy water. She watched her fingers move, washing, rinsing, scrubbing, but it felt distant, mechanical, like operating a puppet with severed strings. In the corner, Owen built towers out of mismatched blocks, humming a tune only he seemed to know. He wore yesterday's bruises like badges, unbothered, stubbornly whole. Elena's chest tightened at the sight. How fragile, how stubbornly brave. She dried her hands, moving with a stiffness that went down to her bones. There was work to do. No time for tears. Not anymore. Sheriff Dalton arrived around 9, his patrol car cutting a wet trail up the rutted driveway. He was a big man, broad across the chest, red-faced from too many years of bourbon and disappointment. His badge gleamed too brightly against his stained uniform. Elena met him on the porch, chin high. "Well, you sure made a mess of things," Dalton said, surveying the broken windows, the sagging porch rail. Elena folded her arms. "They broke in. I defended my home. Isn't that my right?" Dalton's eyes, watery blue, sly, slid past her, scanning for witnesses, for weaknesses. "Victor Whitmore says otherwise," he said casually. "Claims you attacked them. Claims you lured them here." Elena's blood ran cold. "They're lying." Dalton smiled, thin and sharp. "Maybe so. But they've got influence, Miss Vance. Money. Friends in high places. You've got a battered house and a sob story." He leaned closer, breath sour. "If I were you, I'd think real careful about my next move." After he left, leaving behind a warning thinly disguised as advice, Elena paced the battered living room, mind racing. She couldn't stay here, pinned like a bug under a glass. But she couldn't leave, either. Not while Seaglass still held secrets the Whitmores clearly feared. There's something here they want buried. Something they're willing to kill for. Her gaze fell on the iron box still tucked behind the sideboard. She had only read a handful of the letters inside. Most were old, yellowed with age, fragments of a love story doomed to disaster. But maybe there was more. A clue. A weapon. Something she could use. She knelt, pried the box open, and began to read. The letter spoke in voices long dead. A woman named Lila. A man called Jonah. Forbidden love between servant and heir. A secret pregnancy. A broken promise. And, finally, a cover-up so brutal, so absolute, it twisted Elena's stomach into knots. Jonah Whitmore hadn't just abandoned Lila. He had destroyed her. Bribed midwives to falsify records. Hired thugs to handle the inconvenience of her existence. Buried every trace of the scandal deep beneath layers of polished lies. Lila had fled to Seaglass Cottage, pregnant, terrified, hunted. She had given birth here. Alone. Her child, their child, would have been hidden, erased. Unless. Elena's breath caught. Unless the child survived. She flipped through the letters faster now, heart hammering. At the bottom of the box, beneath a false panel, she found it. A birth certificate, brittle and faded. Name, Elise Marrow. Mother, Lila Marrow. Father, unknown. Born right here, in Seaglass Cottage, on a stormy night 57 years ago. Elena's hands trembled. She did the math in her head. 57 years ago, Elise would be an adult now. Middle-aged. Maybe even. Her breath stuttered. Her mother. Her own mother's name had been Elise. No, it can't be. It can't. But it fit. All of it fit. She wasn't just a random heir to Seaglass. She was a Whitmore by blood. The last living thread of their darkest shame. And that made her dangerous. The realization hit her like a slap. That's why they wanted her gone. Not just for the land. Not just for the cottage. For what she represented. Proof. Judgment. Retribution. She stumbled back from the box, heart in her throat. At that exact moment, the phone rang, sharp and shrill. She snatched it up, voice raw. "Hello?" Static crackled in her ear, then a voice slithered through, low, menacing. You should have stayed gone. Click. The line went dead. The world tilted under her feet. Her mind raced, chaotic. They know I found it. She pressed a shaking hand to her mouth, fighting the urge to scream. Owen, sensing her distress, abandoned his blocks and crawled into her lap, wrapping his arms around her waist. She clung to him like a lifeline. I have to protect him. Whatever it takes. Even if it meant bleeding for it. Even if it meant burning sea glass to the ground. She didn't have long to plan. That night, as a cruel orange sunset bled across the sky, headlights flickered down the driveway. Not one car. Not two. 3. Victor. Tessa. And, to Elena's sick disbelief, Sheriff Dalton. They weren't hiding anymore. They were coming to finish it. Officially. Elena grabbed Owen, stuffing a backpack with essentials, flashlight, documents, water, the battered birth certificate. The cottage creaked around them, old bones groaning in warning. Stay quiet, baby, she whispered into Owen's hair. No matter what. He nodded, brave and small. Together, they slipped out the back door, vanishing into the thicket that rimmed the property. The night swallowed them whole. They ran through bramble and mud, Elena's heart thundering so loud she was sure it would give them away. Behind them, voices rose, shouts, curses, the crackle of walkie-talkies. She's gone. Find her. She can't have gotten far. Owen tripped over a root, gasping. Elena scooped him up, muscles screaming. Keep moving. Just keep moving. They broke through the tree line into the old orchard, twisted apple trees long since gone wild, branches gnarled like grasping hands. The barn loomed ahead, a collapsing skeleton of a building, but it offered cover, at least. She staggered inside, bolting the door behind them with a rusted iron bar. Darkness swallowed them. The smell of mildew and rot thickened the air. Elena crouched in the deepest shadows, Owen pressed to her chest. And waited. Footsteps. Boots crunching outside. Flashlights slicing through the gaps in the boards. A shadow passed across the threshold. Come out, Elena, Victor called, voice thick with mockery. This doesn't have to be ugly. Tessa's voice followed, high and sweet and venomous. Let's make a deal, honey. Give us the papers, and we'll let the boy go. Elena's stomach twisted. Liars. Every one of them. She tightened her grip on Owen. They would have to kill her first. And maybe they would. A noise behind her made her whip around. In the darkest corner of the barn, a figure detached itself from the shadows. Not a Whitmore. Not a cop. Someone else. A man, tall, ragged, with haunted eyes and a familiar, crooked smile. Elena, he said softly. It was Caleb. The boy from town. The one she had trusted. The one she had loved, once. The one she had forgotten. He held up his hands, empty, pleading. I'm here to help. Her heart battled itself, hope against fear, memory against survival. Outside, Victor shouted again, closer now. Time was running out. Elena gritted her teeth, made a decision. Then help me end this, she whispered. Caleb nodded. Together, they prepared for war. Part 6, Ashes and Echoes. The world outside the barn pulsed with menace, a steady drumbeat of rage and bloodlust. Inside, Elena pressed her back against the splintered wall, her breath trembling out in shallow gasps. Owen clung to her side, his small hand clutching her sweater with white-knuckled desperation. Across the dim space, Caleb crouched low, muscles coiled like a drawn bow. For a heartbeat, time thinned, stretched taut as a wire ready to snap. Then. Crash. The barn door buckled inward under the force of a heavy boot. Voices stormed in after it, shouting, snarling, barking commands. Flashlights lanced the darkness. Heavy beams of light swung wildly, searching for flesh to devour. Elena's mind raced, frantic. No way out the front. No time to run. No time to think. Her fingers brushed the heavy iron bar that bolted the side entrance. It might buy them seconds, but not salvation. We need a miracle. Caleb moved first. With a guttural roar that tore from deep within his chest, he charged at the advancing figures. He slammed into Victor Whitmore with the force of a wrecking ball, sending the older man sprawling into a stack of rotted hay bales. Elena seized the moment. She scooped Owen into her arms, bolted for the far wall where the boards gaped enough to slip through. But Tessa was faster. Her hand clamped around Elena's wrist, nails biting into the skin. You think you can run from us? Tessa hissed, eyes glittering with fury. You're nothing but gutter trash in a Whitmore world. Elena didn't hesitate. She drove her knee up into Tessa's gut, a savage blow fueled by pure, blistering survival. Tessa crumpled with a shriek, and Elena pushed past her, Owen slung across her hip like a lifeline. They tumbled out into the orchard, moonlight slicing through the skeletal trees. Somewhere behind them, Caleb roared again, and the crack of gunfire split the night. Elena didn't dare look back. She ran. Branches clawed at her face, tore at her clothes. Mud sucked at her boots. Owen whimpered but didn't slow her down, his faith in her so absolute it made her throat burn. At the crest of the hill, she staggered to a stop, chest heaving. Below them, the barn was ablaze, a furious inferno of orange and gold. The fire licked at the sky, devouring the wood with a greedy howl. Sparks rained upward like dying stars. She watched, mesmerized and horrified. Caleb. Had he gotten out? Had he survived? A scream ripped from the burning barn, ragged, raw, and Elena knew. He was still inside. Fighting. Or dying. Maybe both. Her fists clenched at her sides. She should run. Save herself. Save Owen. But her heart, stubborn, traitorous, wouldn't let her. She turned to Owen, crouched low. Listen to me, baby. I need you to hide, right here, behind this tree. Don't move. Don't come out. No matter what. Owen's eyes brimmed with terror, but he nodded. I'll come back for you, she promised, kissing his forehead fiercely. I swear. And then she ran, back into the fire. The heat hit her like a living wall, searing the air from her lungs. She plunged through the broken doorway, ducking low. Inside, chaos reigned. The barn was a collapsing cathedral of flame, rafters groaning, ash snowing down in thick sheets. Caleb lay pinned beneath a fallen beam, blood soaking the dirt around him. He looked up as she stumbled toward him, a grim smile twisting his scorched face. I knew you'd come, he rasped. She dropped to her knees beside him, heedless of the flames licking closer. Hold still, she ordered, shoving at the beam with all her strength. It didn't budge. Caleb coughed, blood flecking his lips. It's too late, he said. Get the boy. Get out. No, she screamed, tears cutting tracks through the soot on her face. I'm not leaving you. He caught her hand in his, surprisingly strong. There's something you need to know, he gasped. Something I should have told you. She froze, heart hammering. What? Caleb's eyes burned brighter than the fire. I'm one of them, he whispered. The world tilted. Elena shook her head, denial a sharp, bitter taste. No, you're lying. I'm Victor's bastard, Caleb said, voice cracking. Born from another secret they buried. Another mistake. Tears streamed down Elena's face, scalding hot. Then why help me? Caleb's fingers tightened on hers. Because I was them, he said, voice thick with shame. But you made me want to be better. Another beam crashed down behind them, sending a shower of sparks into the air. Time was running out. Caleb shoved something into her hand, a flash drive, battered and scorched. Proof, he choked out. Everything they've done. Take it. Finish it. No, Elena sobbed, trying again to lift the beam. But Caleb smiled, soft and broken. Go. With a howl of despair, she obeyed. She burst from the burning barn just as the roof caved in behind her. The roar of the fire drowned her sobs. Owen rushed into her arms, burying his face in her neck. She clung to him, the flash drive digging into her palm like a brand. In the distance, sirens wailed, too late. Way too late. The next few hours blurred into a nightmare. Paramedics. Fire trucks. Deputies with grim faces and clipped questions. Elena said little. She tucked the flash drive deep into her jacket, a secret against her heart. She saw Victor and Tessa watching from the shadows, alive, furious. They weren't finished yet. Neither was she. Later, wrapped in a scratchy blanket, Owen asleep against her, Elena stood at the edge of the smoking ruins. Seaglass Cottage still stood, battered but unbowed. The orchard whispered secrets to the night. Ash floated on the breeze like memories refusing to die. She made a vow then, fierce and blood deep. I will expose them. I will end this. I will be the reckoning they never saw coming. She would not run. She would not hide. Not anymore. The Whitmores had set the world on fire. Now it was her turn to burn it down. The morning dawned blood-red, as if the sky itself wept for what had been lost. Elena stood on the front porch of Seaglass Cottage, the battered structure creaking under the breath of the cold sea wind. The blanket around her shoulders sagged, forgotten. Her mind was a snarl of fire and steel, the events of the night tattooed behind her eyes in vivid, merciless ink. Behind her, Owen stirred, murmuring in his sleep. She turned, glanced back through the cracked doorway. The child, her only real innocence left in this scorched world, clutched a faded stuffed bear to his chest, his brow furrowed even in dreams. He deserves better. We both do. The flash drive weighed heavy in her pocket, as if it contained not just data, but an entire war. And perhaps it did. Elena closed her fingers around it, feeling the jagged plastic bite into her skin. Caleb's face flashed before her, soot-streaked, defiant, dying. You made me want to be better. She wouldn't waste his sacrifice. Not for anything. Down in town, the Whitmores moved like sharks in bloody water. Victor, outwardly composed, but with an iron crack in his voice whenever he barked orders. Tessa, simmering with venom, her mask of charm slipping further with each strained smile. They had survived the fire. They would not survive her. Elena didn't go immediately to the authorities. She wasn't stupid. Whitmore money seeped into every crevice of power, judges, mayors, even the sheriff's office. No, if she was going to bring them down, it had to be public. Explosive. Undeniable. She needed help. Real help. Which meant risking everything. By mid-morning, the town of Marrow Bay buzzed with rumor. Whispers of the fire. Of violence. Of ghosts that refused to stay buried. Elena slipped through the streets like a wraith, eyes hidden under a tattered hood. Every shop window reflected her haunted face back at her, a reminder, there was no going back. Only forward. She found Parker Reed hunched over a chipped formica counter at the Rusty Gull Diner, nursing a black coffee and a bruised conscience. Parker, once the Golden Boy reporter, now little more than a burnout, chain-smoking regret. Perfect. He didn't look up when she slid into the booth across from him. Elena Marrow, he muttered, exhaling a plume of smoke. Figured you were dead. Almost, she said. But not yet. His bloodshot eyes flicked up to hers, wary. What do you want? She pulled the flash drive from her pocket, set it between them. To burn it all down. An hour later, Parker's hands shook as he scrolled through the files. Audio recordings. Financial ledgers. Photos that made Elena's stomach turn even though she had seen them already. Proof of everything, the Whitmores' decades-long stranglehold on Marrow Bay, their extortion, their cruelty, their sins. Christ, Parker whispered, slumping back in the booth. This is career suicide. It's truth, Elena said, voice hard as flint. He studied her across the scratched table. For a long, brittle moment, neither spoke. Then Parker leaned forward, voice low. If we do this, there's no safety net. I'm not looking for safety, Elena said, and meant it. They worked from a safe house, Parker's ex-girlfriend's attic, cluttered with old band posters and the smell of mildew. Owen stayed hidden there too, playing quietly in the corner while Elena and Parker plotted revolution. Every keystroke, every edited line of the story felt like loading a bullet into a gun. By nightfall, the expose was ready. Scheduled for release across multiple outlets, emails prepped to lawyers and media watchdogs alike. Even the Whitmore's power couldn't stop what was coming. Unless they found her first. It didn't take long. At midnight, the house shuddered under the weight of heavy boots on the stairs. Elena heard them before she saw them, the low murmur of Victor's voice, the sharp crack of Tessa's heels. Her heart slammed into her ribs. She grabbed Owen, pressing a finger to his lips. Silence was their last shield. Parker hissed from the doorway, waving frantically. There's a back exit. She bolted, Owen in her arms, Parker at her side. They stumbled into the alley behind the building, moonlight painting the world in shades of silver and dread. A black SUV screeched around the corner, headlights slicing through the fog. Tessa leaned out the window, a gun gleaming in her hand. Elena, she screamed, voice raw with fury. You think you can betray us and live? Elena didn't answer. She ran. The chase blurred into a fever dream. Marrow Bay's narrow streets twisted and writhed, a labyrinth of shadows and terror. Owen's sobs were muffled against her chest. Parker lagged behind, wheezing curses between gasps. The SUV barreled after them, monstrous and relentless. At the pier, Elena made a desperate choice. She turned and faced them. Parker skidded to a halt beside her, eyes wide with horror. What the hell are you doing? Ending it, she said. Victor stepped from the vehicle, calm, precise, every inch the kingpin he believed himself to be. Tessa flanked him, seething. You've made a grave mistake, girl, Victor said, voice smooth as poison. Give us the drive. We'll let you live. You and I both know that's a lie, Elena said, her voice ringing out over the water. Behind her, the ocean churned, a black, endless maw. Victor smiled thinly. You can't win. Elena smiled back, something wild and broken and free sparking in her chest. I already did. With one hand, she hit send on her phone. The expose flooded the world. Emails. News feeds. Social media. Marrow Bay's dirty heart laid bare for all to see. Victor's smile faltered. Tessa screamed, an animal sound of pure rage. And then chaos erupted. The sheriff's deputies, tipped off anonymously, roared onto the scene. Parker yanked Owen behind a piling, shielding him with his body. Victor lunged at Elena, and for a moment, the world froze. She saw not a powerful man, but a hollow tyrant, desperate and crumbling. She sidestepped him easily, watched as he lost his balance and tumbled into the freezing, unforgiving sea. Tessa shrieked and tried to follow, but the deputies tackled her to the planks. Handcuffs glinted under the flickering streetlights. It was over. The Whitmore's empire lay in ruins. Marrow Bay, for the first time in decades, was free. Elena stood at the edge of the pier, the salt wind ripping through her hair, her soul. Parker limped up beside her, Owen asleep in his arms. You did it, Parker said, voice thick with wonder. No, Elena said quietly. We did. Below them, the sea whispered and seethed, washing away the blood, the lies, the chains. Above them, dawn cracked open the sky, spilling light like a promise. But deep inside her, Elena knew this was not the end. Freedom was not a gift. It was a battle fought every single day. She would fight it, for Owen, for herself, for the ghosts that still walked these streets. She would never forget. And she would never surrender. Not again. Not ever.